In general, we at Hardware Lab agreed that neither Radeon 7000 series GPUs nor RTX 4000 cards provide a good value across the board. The used market for the previous gen cards is now probably a best bang for buck option with little to no disadvantages, and it is sad to see what direction the GPU market currently follows. However, the semi-high-end RX 7800 XT and RTX 4070 got relatively positive reviews, and they don't look as bad option for upgrade, especially in comparison to a lower tier market full of complete trash. Today we are going to compare these two GPUs, find the pros and cons of each, so you can identify the card that suits you. We will also include some newer games released after the cards themselves, so grab a cup of tea, some snacks, and welcome back to Hardware Lab. Before the testing section, we'll take a brief look at stats. RTX 4070 has 46 SM units built on Ada Lovelace architecture, 5nm technology, huge buffer of L2, common for all 4000 series cards, 64 RUBs, 184 textures, and of course one ray tracing unit per SM. The memory subsystem is a bit concerning for this class of cards. Buffer totals at just 12GB, which might become an issue way faster than you expect. All that on just 192-bit bus, but it is relatively advanced GDDR6X memory, bandwidth around 500 gigs. Launch price $600. RX 7800 XT is based on RDNA 3 architecture. It features 5nm technology as well, although the energy efficiency of RDNA 3 in general is questionable when compared to Ada Lovelace. 60 compute units, 96 RUBs, 240 TMUs and 60 RT units make it feel that 7800 XT is more well packed with a brute force card. It will be interesting to see if 4070 can catch up with way less resources available. Another good topic to discuss is ray tracing. Despite having more RT units on paper, we expect AMD's card to fall behind in general, especially in extreme ray tracing scenarios. This is due to architectural differences in ray tracing functionality between the two. We have a dedicated video about ray tracing on different cards, which I suggest you watch for a clearer understanding. It covers previous generation RX 6000 and RTX 3000 GPUs, and not much has changed since then. And about memory subsystem, it's just way better on AMD. What did you expect? 16 gigs of GDDR6 with 256-bit bus, total bandwidth 624GB per second, relatively small amount of L2 cache but huge pool of 2nd gen L3 cache, and the launch price $100 less than a competition, although in reality prices are much closer, but 7800 XT is still cheaper. 7800 XT featured in this test is a Sapphire Pure model, and RTX 4070 is MSI Gaming X Slim. No auto overclocking was used. We have heard your feedback and realized it's not a good way to test cards. It adds plenty of random errors, so both cards were slightly tuned manually. Not much, just a minor frequency increase, so that the 7800 XT was working on around 2500 MHz and 4070 around 2900, as well as a slight boost of memory clocks. All the benchmarks were done on the Ryzen 7 5700X 3D with 3766 MHz RAM CL16-15-1536. But we still expect comments that these GPUs can only be tested in the NASA supercomputer from the people who know nothing about GPU load sensor and bottleneck and also like to count our money. Main rasterization and ray tracing tests were done at 4K output resolution. The input resolution is controlled by a reconstruction technique if applied, so before typing your wonderful opinion, please check the tested settings displayed on the left of the graph. DLSS won't be turned on for direct comparison, because it won't be a direct comparison if it would. However, for non-regular viewers of this channel, The topic of frame generation and reconstruction differences will also be covered later in the video. The last thing to mention is that the raster test this time is surprisingly full of games that technically ray trace in real time, mostly the Unreal Engine 5 titles that only support software lumen. We decided to include those games in a raster comparison simply because they don't utilize the hardware ray tracing acceleration, but their workload is definitely different than your normal raster game. I guess this is just the current state of the industry. Most of the technically advanced games use some form of ray tracing, otherwise they are likely out of competition in terms of visual quality in 2024. Indica is probably a peak of Unreal Engine 4 visuals, and the game runs fine even in native 4K. Don't mind the frame time spikes, they are the default long shot frame errors that sometimes appear in MSI Afterburner. 7800 XT is faster in general in our test run, but it is not consistent and really depends on the particular scene. Another extremely impressive Unreal 4 title demonstrates the difference between different scenes. However, here the GPUs are on par in general. Unreal Engine 5 looks stunning. Software lumen is obviously worse than hardware, but who cares when the game looks almost photorealistic, especially in combination with nanite and extremely detailed geometry. 7800 XT is faster again, even if the difference is not that huge. First clear win for the RTX 4070 so far. If it weren't for a slight CPU limit at the beginning of the run, the win would have been even greater. Yes, a CPU limit in Hogsmeade on a 5700X 3D. Something is still wrong with this game. However, this test also shows that RTX 4070's CPU dependency is worse than on AMD GPUs. We have a dedicated video on this topic, so you are more than welcome to watch it when you're done with this one. One more significant win for the 7800 XT in another Unreal 5 title. At this point, nothing surprising. Unexpectedly, Cyberpunk 2077 shows a huge advantage on the RX 7800 XT side, and it has nothing to do with the VRAM overflow, it's just noticeably faster itself. On the other hand, in Alan Wake 2, even without any ray tracing, RTX 4070 is a bit faster, but the difference is relatively small. We expected a higher gap between the cards in Starfield. I guess the game and driver updates on Nvidia brought a noticeable boost. But the boost was there on AMD as well, and the game still prefers Radeon GPUs. In the Talos principle too, 4070 is doing a pretty bad job at rendering dense vegetation. The drop at this benchmark section is noticeably more significant than on 7800 XT, and the same can be noticed when exploring the game's world. 7800 XT is not only faster but more consistent in this game. Despite the quite recent PC release of Ghost of Tsushima, it was originally ported from PS4, so it can represent some older-ish game. 7800 XT is slightly faster here as well. And some really unusual load. Teardown is a voxel-based game with some form of software ray tracing, and recently it got the DirectX 12 update. 7800 XT here is faster. It is pretty hard to find a game where 4070 would win, at least without hardware-accelerated ray tracing. But it is clear that cards on different architectures react differently on different tasks, so there are some games where 4070 is faster. And also there are scenes within one game where 4070 is faster, despite 7800 XT being faster overall in the test run. It's just a reminder that you should always keep the architectural differences in mind when choosing a GPU and shouldn't pay too much attention to the 10 games average graphs and things like that. Starting with relatively light ray tracing in Resident Evil, and it is not enough to demonstrate Nvidia's ray tracing advantage. Aside from fast RT cores, this game likes large and fast VRAM buffers and subsystems. The VRAM on 4070 is definitely not large and not fast, so it gets VRAM limited pretty quickly. But even when it doesn't, 4070 is still slower. Enabling ray tracing in Callisto Protocol hits performance equally significantly, keeping cards different in any picked scene, but on par on average. In Returnal, the advantage of RTX 4070 in terms of ray tracing becomes obvious. Despite this is not a win and cards are on par, we can clearly see that 4070 has a higher chance to be faster in scenes with more ray tracing on the screen, and 7800 XT feels better when there is less. For some reason, the overall performance hit of enabling RT in Hogwarts Legacy is higher on 4070. That might be related to a beginning of a test run with a slight CPU limitation that stays here on 4070. One of the currently best looking game titles, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, runs slightly better on 4070. Is it because of the ray tracing capabilities or something else? We'll never know, there is no way to disable RT features in the game. Another game without an option to disable RT runs faster on 4070. Metro Exodus Enhanced is not a new game, but it definitely stresses the RT capabilities of the GPUs. Disordre is one of the few games that supports hardware-accelerated lumen ray tracing. I'm not sure if this is a good representation of how future Unreal 5 titles would perform, but it is an absolute win for 4070. The test results in Cyberpunk are somewhat similar to Resident Evil 4. Theoretically, in this game 4070 must be better at dealing with ray tracing, but it just can't show it because of the VRAM limitation. And you know what's funny? Without RT, VRAM overflow on 4070 wasn't an issue. That's the thing you should keep in mind. Ray tracing requires some additional VRAM. But you know what? There is a path tracing added in Cyberpunk, and here 4070 is obviously faster. The problem is, to achieve this playable FPS, we needed to scale down to FSR Ultra Performance mode, so our rendering resolution currently is 720p. Of course, you can play with settings and make the path tracing somewhat playable, but I'd still see this mode more of a technical demonstration rather than a way to enjoy the game. Well, until I can afford 4090. Where VRAM limitation is not an issue even with ray tracing is Alan Wake 2, although the number is still scarily close, so I can't guarantee this not happening somewhere in the game. Alan Wake with ray tracing is not an easy task for either of the tested cards, but the visuals here definitely worth it, and 4070 is doing a better job. Another test with path tracing and another clear win for 4070. with unbeatable result. It is also worth mentioning that in this game, we managed to stay at FSR performance level rather than ultra performance with path tracing, which is pretty impressive. The 1997 game with a full path tracing stresses only the RT capabilities of cards and nothing else without any tricks. That was an obvious win for an RTX card, right? The Riftbreaker is not a 1997 game, but other than ray tracing, it is extremely simple to render, so most of the load you see here is RT. 4070 is still faster here, but nowhere near as dramatically as in some other games. As expected, with RT things don't look as bad for an RTX 4070. However, the memory subsystem of this card becomes concerning. Some games in this test were memory limited already, despite the card being just a year old and costs over £500. Obviously, the VRAM consumption of the games will keep increasing, and who knows, maybe your favorite channel VRAM Lab will soon post a video 12 gigs of VRAM, pain and suffering. Photorealistic assets and ray tracing are quickly becoming new real-time rendering standards, and they love VRAM. But do we mean that 4070 is a worse GPU in general? No, we do not. These are all just warnings that you should consider. And on the other hand, RTX 4070, due to a superior RT core design with more BVH calculations per cycle, is really doing a good job in path tracing. There are not many games that support it currently, and it is extremely heavy, but it might be a massive advantage for you if you're interested. Furthermore, today it is just a well-performing card. If you upgrade quite often, want to try path tracing at its best for this money, and don't mind potentially lowering the textures in new releases in some future, RTX 4070 might be a good card for your needs. And yeah, DLSS and FSR, I remember I promised to touch on that topic. First of all the tests you've seen so far were done either in native resolution or with FSR, because FSR is available on all cards and DLSS relies on tensor cores that are only present on Nvidia GPUs. Comparing the cards with DLSS on one and FSR on the other just doesn't seem like apples to apples comparison. But in general, I'm pretty sure it doesn't matter what upscaling technique out of these two are used. Let me prove that with some tests. In Ghost of Tsushima, DLSS is just slightly faster than FSR, so it doesn't change much, but at least there is a difference. The same thing can be said about Talos Principle too, but here DLSS advantage is even smaller. I would even say within the margin of error. In Starfield, there is little to no difference as well. DLSS and FSR in general, when implemented right, are extremely close in terms of visual quality these days, despite DLSS being hardware accelerated. There are plenty of quality comparisons between the two online, so we won't go deep into it here, but the main point is, even if there is a performance difference, it is totally unnoticeable due to both DLSS and FSR being utilized in a tiny fraction of a frame time. So all the comparisons between the cards, regardless of which of these two techniques are chosen, are valid. However, there are probably some games where one or the other technique will execute faster, which creates inconsistency, and this is the reason we were using only FSR in the main test. But what about frame generation? It's another interesting topic to cover. I mean, we at Hardware Lab still think that frame generators are overhyped and have a lot of disadvantages. But if you are using FrameGen on your Nvidia card and wondering if FSR is going to be faster, or maybe you think that due to a lack of DLSS FrameGen, AMD cards are going to be worse at this solved task, let's find out. In Ghost of Tsushima, no clear difference between FSR and DLSS frame generators can be found, almost frame to frame. The same can't be said about Talos Principle 2. Here, FSR frame gen on NVIDIA GPU is significantly faster than NVIDIA's own frame gen. However, the trade-off in this game is that FSR frame gen requires FSR reconstruction or AA to be used, and it is impossible to run this with DLSS reconstruction, unlike the Ghost of Tsushima implementation. There are not that many games that officially support both generators, and their implementation may vary. However, it is clear that sometimes using AMD's frame generator even on NVIDIA GPU is a pretty good idea. We are planning to release a more detailed video on that as well, so keep following us if you are interested. And for now, we have another test related to FrameGen. If FSR FrameGen can be superior in terms of output and supports both AMD and NVIDIA cards, let's check which card is going to benefit more from its usage. XT was already faster in Ghost of Tsushima without FrameGen, but increased the advantage with it from around 15% to around 25%. In the Talos Principle 2, the increase in performance difference is scary high. 7800 XT was 8% faster without FrameGen, and with FrameGen it is 23% faster. In Starfield, another massive 7800 XT lead increase can be seen, from being around 10% faster to around 19%. Yep, 7800 XT overall deals way better with the frame generation, Honestly, I wasn't expecting that to happen, but I can't really think of any sensible reason why is it the case. Today's test demonstrated the advantages and disadvantages of both cards, so that you can better understand the difference between them and buy the card that works best for you. My personal opinion, I'm glad that I didn't buy a 4070 instead of 7800 XT, despite I really wanted to have Nvidia as a main GPU in my PC for some time. You know, it just happened since 2016 that it is always AMD. However, I don't think 4070 is a bad GPU, far from it. I just wish they installed 16 gigs of VRAM that would also increase the bandwidth. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching. We now have plenty of new videos planned, so make sure to follow, and as usual, stay up to date with HL. Thank you for watching till the end. I have a few important updates to share with you. First, many of you have asked about the background tracks in our videos. They are all AI generated and fully licensed through our Soundful AI subscription. We've decided to share them on SoundCloud, and the first collection is now available. You can find the link in the description below, so feel free to use them as you like. Secondly, we hope you've noticed a significant improvement in the quality of our recent videos compared to our older ones. Producing high quality videos has been challenging, especially since our team has shrunk to just Mozio and me. Unfortunately, the rest of our team had to leave for various reasons, and both Mozio and I are dealing with some difficult personal circumstances that we can't really discuss. Given our current situation, we are looking for new team members who are passionate about what we do and want to help us to create great content. Ideally, you should be based in the UK, have experience with Final Cut Pro, and be knowledgeable about computer hardware. However, we are open to anyone who can contribute meaningfully and is enthusiastic about helping. So if you're interested in joining us, please reach out to me on Discord through our server, link is in the description, or leave your Discord ID in the comments and I'll get in touch with you. Thanks again for watching, and we hope to see you in the next video soon.